Greetings, colleagues and honorable guests. It is with great honor for me to address this auspicious conference. And indeed, there could be no more important time in the history of our country and indeed globally since the end of the Cold War to be having this conversation. The Zondo Commission's daily reminds us here in South Africa of the devastating effects of poor governance and the resultant corruption at a national level. Institutions have been hollowed out, and predatory business elites successfully captured a cohort of political elites, cementing an elite bargain that benefited a narrow few at the expense of the majority of our citizens. It has become increasingly difficult for responsible, well-governed businesses to operate in South Africa. Globally, we breathe a momentary sigh of relief that Joe Biden has replaced the autocratic populist Donald Trump. However, as Darren Asimogu and a number of other prominent intellectuals have warned, the discontent and structural factors that precipitated Trump's victory have not been resolved. And this will require a renewed global focus on governance, especially on the interplay between economic factors such as the advancement of technology and automation and global trade patterns that produce uneven growth, and political factors which talk to resentment at being left behind, giving space to populist exploitation of deep-rooted fears. Our task over the next decade is not easy, but it is critical if we are to forge the kind of world that we want our grandchildren to inherit. My task this morning is to help us reimagine the pillars of governance, risk, and compliance. The order, of course, is critical. Poor governance creates risk for business, and a mere focus on compliance will not help to address structural risks. A new paradigm will be required. On the question of governance, most businesses tend to conceptualize governance as an internal matter of coherence at best, with the spirit of security exchange listing rules, or even with global best practices and compliance with King 4, of which we'll be hearing much more in the next session from Professor King himself. But today, I would like to advance the idea that governance at the macro level, considering matters of national political economies, is just as critical for businesses as internal governance. In fact, the two are irrevocably intertwined. If governance at macro level, the national space in which businesses operate, is good, then internal governance tends to follow. Risk automatically declines, and compliance becomes a pleasure rather than a bureaucratic burden. If my hypothesis is correct, the immediate implication is that private sector players need to see themselves as development partners rather than a mere price taker when it comes to national level policies and the operating environment. To the contrary, they need to play a more active role in helping the state itself to build institutions that can repel and even prevent the kind of predatory capture that we have seen in South Africa in the recent past, or even the sheer purchase of policy by powerful lobbies in the US is a clear indication of what I'm trying to point out here. The view of business is typical, that paying taxes is the beginning and end of a company's obligation to the state. The continuance of such a view can and will lead to the creation of a business environment in which gangsters, not well-governed businesses, thrive. It is therefore imperative that the private sector, especially across Africa, invest resources in strengthening state capacity and institutions that hold power to account and prevent abuse of that power by the executive. In this process, irresponsible players will be crowded out, opening the space for a virtuous cycle to develop, in which well-governed companies gain ascendancy. As businesses grow, employment grows, leading to improved health and education outcomes. This ultimately leads to broad-based development that locks the state and civil society into a social compact that protects the public interest and allows economic dynamism to flourish. With these prefacing remarks in place, I must of course provide a definition of what governance is. At Good Governance Africa, we define governance as the authoritative allocation of resources. It is the process that ultimately determines who gets what, when, and how. If that process is hijacked by the predatory elites to cement a narrow elite bargain, then society itself suffers. If that process is characterized by a robust set of institutions that can withstand the winds of autocratic tempest, social well-being can and will improve. Good governance, therefore, is in a large part about building these institutions that really safeguard good governance. Nobel laureate, the late Douglas North, left us with an abiding conceptual framework in which he characterizes countries as either limited access orders or open access orders. In the former, governance is oriented around building political and economic institutions that protect narrow interests and limited access to political and economic opportunities to a very limited inner circle of power. In the latter, institutions have evolved to the point where they can withstand the rule of someone like a Donald Trump. This is not to say that the US is now free from having to address the underlying structural factors that brought about the shameful moment in history. And indeed, Biden has a short window in which to do this. But it is to say that its institutions have withstood this political and governance tempest. They live beyond the life of one demagogue to have the power to expel him from the center of power. The challenge for limited access orders, though, such as ours in South Africa, is to move to an open access order. I'd like to spend the rest of the time afforded to me today to articulate how I think we might, as society, attain some of the doorstep conditions that would move us towards a more programmatic, less personalized, and more inclusive political settlement in our societies. There are a multitude of conditions, but I'd like to address them under two simple headings for the sake of time. First, addressing corruption is critical. I'll say that again. Addressing corruption is critical. Corruption is a curse that is both a symptom of underlying institutional decay and a cause of current and future malaise. If it is not stopped in its tracks, even the best internal governance structures will buckle under the weight of external risk in the operating environment. So, in essence, companies may be able to comply with legislation on paper, but the practical reality will be that laws are meaningless and investment will likely not be credibly honored or protected. I use the Zondo Commission here in South Africa as an example of an institution that could serve as a building block for a deeper set of institutions that strongly disincentivize corruption. Second, We need to build institutions that level the political playing field and create the right operating environment for attractive, responsible private sector players. In other words, we have to get about cutting the umbilical cord of resource sapping state owned entities such as the South African airlines and the remaining host of large state owned enterprises that cannot produce a clean audit. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on. So, the current Zondo Commission on State Capture in South Africa, as I've indicated, really provides us with the most relevant context of articulating the importance of tackling corruption. For one, the revelations thus far revealed or highlight all elements of non-conformance to matters that the GRC rightly treats as crucial. That is, the denial of governance accountability in instances of wrongdoing, transactional arrangements not aligned to financial regulatory standards, illegal instructions clouded under political direction, which dilutes administrative accountability and decision making on the part of legally appointed public officials. As the Commission continues with its mandate, the list of incidents grows longer, painting a picture of deep malicious malfeasance. So, despite this episode in the history of South Africa, or in the history of South Africa's democratic dispensation, allowing for suitable case references that will be added to the volumes of writings on leadership and institutional governance failures, the GRC as a concept cluster has a specific articulation of deep relevance for us today. It is defined by the 2003 Open Compliance Ethics Group, the OCEG, as the integrated collection of capabilities that enable an organization to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and to act with integrity. So, notwithstanding the aforementioned dichotomy that the understanding of the concept is at best a foreign concept to public administration at present, validation of this deductive reasoning is, firstly, derived from limited literature on the matter by public administration scholars, citing that this particular sector is usually linked with risk avoidance culture, with a reactive rather than a proactive approach towards the management of risk. A second point to note is that the technological environment is the space in which the GRC seems to locate and engage in this debate. This is evident in the application of software, in the use of integrated businesses or organizations and institutions, such as human resource management, auditing, and finance, to mention but a few. In the case of public administration governance, the case for an improved holistic approach to connect the services, clients, and the different levels of governance is really the thing that we need to advocate for. It is my submission here that in considering the definition of GRC by the OEG as the benchmark reference, the placement and importance, therefore, of both private and public entities has been affirmed by the COVID-19 health pandemic. Most important to this matter is the realization that among the many adjustments that the pandemic has forced upon institutions is the drastic shift to how businesses and related processes have been conducted previously. For one, the closing of geographic border disrupted, let me repeat that. For one, the closing of geographic borders disrupted, for example, direct face-to-face engagement for the auditor to ensure effective on-site assurance in the appraisal of documents, resultant delays for the transport industry in the provision of supplies to customers across national borders, a recalibration of the provision of seamless education and training, and a drastic reduction in profit, while losses increased, unfortunately, exponentially. This period further elevated particular risks above others, notably cybercrime, threats targeting institutional data, personal data, as well as theft of funds through hijacking of business accounts. In the case of Africa, the realities of the fourth industrial revolution have exposed the situation that the more developed North is advancing at a pace on. Our continent continues, unfortunately, to play catch up in this regard. That Africa holds greater opportunities for e-commerce or general e-services cannot be discounted. Online shopping during the pandemic has provided the opportunities for related companies. However, such developments and the increase to social media and the use of mobile money transfers have exposed governments and businesses to increase cyber threats from transnational crime syndicates and terrorist groupings. The adoption and implementation of best practices, such as espoused by the Financial Action Task Force, therefore become so important. Moreover, the realization of the Eastern and Southern African Anti-Money Laundering Group, ESAAMLG, in 2018 through the incorporation and adoption of a memorandum of understanding by the Council of Ministers of Eastern and Southern States is a welcome development. Such realities are demonstrative of the broader importance of GRC. With calls for accountable governance beginning to resonate across geographic boundaries due to also to the roles played by NGOs and civil society and the adoption of regulations to entrench consequence management in the management of public funds, as evidenced by the South African government having adopted the Public Audit Amendment Act in 2018. GRC considerations appear, fortunately, to be gaining traction. It is perhaps opportune to highlight the intention of this particular piece of legislation in the context of this GRC conference, and as a regulatory compliance mechanism with the Auditor General of South Africa having outlined its purpose by stating, I quote, "After years of diligent, if frustrating, reporting on the status of financial and performance management in the public sector, Parliament has responded to our persistent messages about the mismanagement of public resources by unanimously passing the Public Audit Amendment Bill of 2018, PAA Bill, in both houses of Parliament. While our stakeholders have taken note of poor audit outcomes in all spheres of government, their overwhelming desires to know what has been done to deal with accountability failures in the auditees' environment that led to an environment of deteriorated financial health, a lack of delivery, and failure to maintain services and infrastructure. The intention is not only to fight corruption and waste, but also to help restore the integrity of financial and performance management systems used to achieve government's development goals. And this, of course, was the Auditor General speaking in 2018. So these realities provide only a snapshot of the immediate risks that continue to confront institutions. However, As much as these implications became evident during the pandemic, the situation also provided opportunities through the application of technology to try and adapt to this new normal. It brought about a situation where a certain level, at a certain level, some companies and institutions could leverage the ability to speed ahead of the competition in order to ensure seamless interaction and provision of necessary goods and services, while companies emerged to provide technological services. And these definitely excel to the extent that the market share in this particular sector has seen growth and interest from investors globally. So what is the way forward? The importance of GRC for governments is located in the reality that public entities have to do more with less disbursements from their respective national treasuries. This compounds the problem further in that the advancements in technological applications to expedite service delivery continue to play out in an environment characterized by associated challenges of fraud and corruption, along with inept information technology infrastructure, to mention but a few. The situation for leadership of both businesses and the private sector is to realize that the assurance provided to the broader stakeholders has to be framed by a process where GRC is truly reflective as sustained, result-bearing within the four outcomes as enunciated by the King 4 report, notably that boards and public administration leaders ensure the development and sustainment of an ethical culture, and that they facilitate the realization of good performance, ensure effective control in all matters associated with strategic purpose and intent, and maintain legitimacy in reporting of achievements and addressing business continuity in the context of profitability, future prospects, and value for money, especially in the case of the public sector. Of course, GRC considerations will gain increasingly greater traction as countries move away from elite bargain characterizing limited access orders. But the double-edged sword of this truth is that tackling corruption, even in the context of deep malfeasance being exposed by the Zondo Commission here in South Africa, is one of the crucial factors that will lead South Africa into a more open access order. So, tackling corruption will, as explained above, entail the establishment of new institutions such as the Public Audit Amendment Bill. However, it's also clear that South Africa has had plenty of institutional mechanisms on paper to prevent corruption. These have often proved only as credible and useful as the people who run them. For instance, the National Prosecuting Authority and the Office of the Public Protector have invariably only proved as useful as the people who lead these key institutions. These and institutions like them must be strengthened to ensure that their integrity is not dependent on the people in charge. At a broader level, this also suggests that political competition is necessary to ensure that the incumbent is deterred from behaving with impunity. One of the ways to generate such competition is by creating a broader middle class, which leads to my second possible intervention. The arguments I'm about to make are typically incongruent with the incentives that animate incumbency. They should be made nonetheless, I believe, for as we explore the various topics on the table today and tomorrow, we must realize that much responsibility and power lies with the private sector. To use the GRC toolkit to advance the creation of a better business environment, which in turn shapes the incentives that motivate governments. First, it is crucial that we are able to convey the importance of improving our credit rating agency scorecard. While one may debate the disproportionate power invested in these institutions, the truth is that there is significant merit in allowing some basic precepts. Fiscal discipline, for instance, signals to the world that we are responsible and accountable. Taking money from health and education budgets to bail out SAA is robbing Peter really to pay Paul, neither responsible or accountable at all. Similarly, it behoves our governments to open the space for competitive businesses to provide electricity to a centralized grid that operates independently from the shackles of ESCOM, allocating resources towards fruitful enterprises that are the country's best long-run interest goes a long way towards attracting the type of investment in every sector that takes a very long view. Only once this kind of investment rolls in, which will only happen when we improve our credit ratings, will the tax base grow and flourish. The state with the cash it requires to make a dent in our ever-growing external debt. Secondly, we have to grow the tax base. Resources must be allocated towards growing small and medium-sized enterprises in South Africa, as these are critical employers in the context of official unemployment rates, nearly running at around 30%. Such an economic plan must also be connected to the mining sector as it pivots away from fossil fuels towards minerals and metals of the future, such as chrome and manganese, of which we have an abundance in South Africa. If we fail to broaden the tax base, then the public sector wage bill and our booming external debt will become rapidly unaffordable, if it isn't already. The ravages of COVID-19 have left a 300 billion hole in our fiscus, nearly 30% of the country's annual budget. Every policy move that supports the growth of local business is a move towards plugging that hole. Thirdly, we have to persuade our government that the days of intervening, or rather of not intervening, in our neighbors' affairs on the grounds of sovereignty may well be over. Zimbabwe and Mozambique, for example, show us or demonstrate problems that are our problems. Tanzania and Zambian problems are our problems. That is why at Good Governance Africa, we emphasize that governance is not to be narrowly conceived in national terms. These are principles, we believe, of governance that are good and right and true and therefore universal. The extension of presidential term limits, the abuse of citizenry, and sheer repression of basic civil liberties are an abhorrence that none of us should tolerate. Improving the business environment through changing the set of political institutions that determine the ease of doing business is of untold importance. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have much to look forward to over the next 2 days on a subject that could not be really closer to my heart. I trust that the focus I have provided on the importance of governance at a macro political level will serve as a useful guide into the discussions that follow. The take-home message is simply this. Governance is not only about ensuring that our internal processes and systems are sound. It is simultaneously about working together to forge better governance at the national and regional levels. In so doing, external risks are reduced and compliance becomes logical instead of being burdensome or some kind of tick box exercise. I really thank you for taking the time to listen to what I've shared today, and I wish you all the very best. Take care.